While Lighter is one of the most flashy agents ZenlessZoneZero has to offer, there are even more reasons to love this flaming Dazer. But before I explain why, I have a few notes about Lighter and the way that he plays. He's a stunner that relies heavily on his morale gauge and team energy, but he's also an amazing ice plus fire buffer that really takes things to the next level. Now in my first impressions video, I detailed a few reasons why I thought Lighter had potential, but today I'll be showing everything you need to know to make him insane. Before I continue though, remember that the footage from today's video will be from the creator beta server, so things are subject to change. Without further ado, let's break down Lighter. Put simply, Lighter's goal is to buff the team as soon as possible while also dazing enemies too. Fortunately for Lighter, he does two of these things at the same time simply through his core skill and additional ability. This is both a blessing and a curse, however, since his buffs and stun are tied to a resource gauge that requires allies to use their energy. But with more and more testing, many of these features in his kit actually make him feel much different than your average Dazer. To explain further, let's talk about his kit now. Let's start with his core passive. Now unfortunately, Lighter's core passive description has not shortened between now and my last video, so let's go over it. Lighter's unique resource is morale. He generates it at a rate of 2.9 per second with a cap of 100 while your team is in combat, and he also gains bonus morale whenever a squad mate uses energy. When Lighter reaches the 80 morale threshold, this is where the magic begins. The next time he swaps in after 80 morale is reached, he performs a quick assist, and additionally, using the 5th hit of his basic attack combo after the threshold also sends Lighter into the morale burst state. Now before I lose you, here's a short summary of what you need to know about using the core passive. Storing and gaining morale to then swapping over to Lighter is his overall gameplay loop. This enhances both Lighter's stun potential and also buffs the rest of the team too. Now let's go back to the kit description. Activating and staying in the morale burst state has several benefits. It increases the damage and daze of his abilities while striking. It buffs his impact up to a maximum of 20% for 6 seconds. Performing light punches or jab combos will decrease the target's ice and fire resistance by 15% for 30 seconds. And finally, when Lighter's finishing move hits an enemy, it applies the collapse effect on a target, which extends its stun duration by 3 seconds. If this sounds like a lot of utility and value for just one skill, you're not wrong. It is quite a lot. But here are some other important things you need to know if you want to use his burst state. First, Lighter will no longer automatically gain morale over time while in this state. Second, if his morale is exhausted during a startup light punch or jab combo, he will instead automatically follow up with a more powerful finishing move. And finally, the collapse effect that increases the stun duration I mentioned earlier is only applicable once per enemy before they recover from stun. This just means that you can extend the duration of the stun one time, but you can't infinitely increase the duration forever since, well, that would just be OP. Let's move on to Lighter's additional ability. This activates if you have an attack or a Sons of Caledon agent on your team, and when its requirements are met, this enhances Lighter during his morale state even more. When the morale state is active, Lighter provides his team with a new buff called Elation. This stacks up to 20 times and lasts 30 seconds, and these stacks increase an agent's ice damage and fire damage by 1.25%. At base, this means he will offer allies a 25% increase to fire and ice damage, but that's not all. If Lighter's impact exceeds 170, every 10 additional points will increase the buff effect per stack by an additional 0.25%. This means that the additional buff can increase the damage boost from Elation by a maximum of 75%. Now before we go any further, I do want to mention that anyone who performs a chain attack will also refresh the duration of Elation on the team, and with this, that makes Elation much more easy to manage than you'd think. To summarize what you actually gain just from playing Lighter alongside his teammates, however, here's a quick list. You not only gain a potential 75% element damage buff with the bottom line of 25%, you also gain 15% ice and fire shred alongside 3 additional seconds of stun and a boost to his own personal stun rate. Now with stat boosts out of the way, let's talk about what his kit actually does, since it can be kind of intimidating with how much text there is. Let's start with Lighter's basic attacks. This is a 5-part basic attack combo that can be held down instead of pressed. While this is different from most other characters, what actually makes this ability noteworthy is what happens when Lighter performs a basic attack combo while in morale burst state. We touched on it already during the core passive and additional ability section, but the buffs and debuffs Lighter provides when using his basic attacks is the main reason why the skill is so good. Now something also worth knowing here is that the first parts of Lighter's basic attacks don't apply nearly as much daze as his 5th hit or even some of his finishing moves do, and that's one of the other reasons why Lighter prefers being off field until his allies use energy or until he can bypass these attacks via other means. With that, let's now talk about his special attacks, which do allow him to bypass said weak basic attacks. On their own, Lighter's EX special attack is a 2-part combo with the first EX special that can be used to uppercut and a follow-up EX special that can be used to smash into the ground. Each variation of the EX special deals decent daze and damage, but there is a difference in energy cost. Similar to other agents where the energy cost of the first EX special is higher than the second, Lighter's uppercut costs 40 energy to cast, whereas his downward smash costs 20. Since he also has access to a total pool of 120 energy, this means that he can activate 2 back-to-back combos of his first EX special into a second EX special, but this is of course dependent on your resource management. One of the best parts about Lighter's EX special is also it granting him the ability to skip to the fourth part of his basic attack after using it. This, as mentioned in the basic attack section, allows him to utilize the best stun skills in his kit more quickly without needing to waste time using low daze multiplier attacks to get there. Lighter also has another EX special attack, but this one is more conditional. If you perform a sidestep dodge, you can then activate a new enhanced quick jab that applies daze while also allowing you to skip to his fifth attack. Unlike the uppercut or smash into the ground, this EX special allows you to begin his attack combo from the fifth part of his basic attack instead of his fourth. This is honestly a bit more niche to use. However, since it allows you to get to the fifth part of his basic attack while using an EX special, it is worth considering and putting something in your back pocket in case you need it. Despite most stunners gaining insane value from their dodge counters, Lighter doesn't remain on field for too long, which means that some of his dodge skills may lose value. This isn't to say that his dodge counter is bad though, since performing one allows him to skip ahead to his fifth basic. Aside from this dodge counter and the ability to perform a new EX special, however, the rest of his dodge related abilities are pretty standard. Lighter's assists are valuable since they are one of the main ways that he enters the field, but make no mistake, they have great value by themselves too. In addition to the daze that they provide, using a follow-up assist grants Lighter the ability to skip to his fifth basic again, and this paired with him using it to enter onto field will be very important since the daze application and basic skips allow Lighter to start generating daze quickly. Side note, the free quick assist that Lighter gains from being over 80 morale and swapping onto field does not get used or consumed when performing a defensive assist. Do with that what you will. Lighter's chain attack is pretty standard in all ways, but do remember that if you pair something like swing jazz on your Lighter, you'll have to use Lighter's chain in order to gain its 4-piece passive. More on disc drives later though. After a bit more testing, I actually found Lighter's ultimate to do a pretty funny amount of damage when I fully committed to him being a DPS, but seriously guys, as of 1.3, this is something that should really stay as a joke. If you want to build Lighter as a DPS, feel free to do so, but it's not that significant. Decibels of course are also very important for any team composition, and Lighter using them would definitely be less valuable than using it on someone like Soldier, Ellen, or pretty much any main DPS. In regards to skill priority for Lighter, here's the order that I would suggest. Core skill, as it increases his overall impact, followed by EX special since it's one of the best ways for him to generate daze. Then his assist and basic attacks are the next two to max. Finally, his chain and dodge can be maxed last. Now despite this ordering of skill upgrades, however, the most important thing to know about his skills is that any skill level increase will inevitably provide more daze on his abilities. And in that sense, you could argue that maxing any or all of them will be valuable since you can then stun quicker. Before I move on to the combo section, I wanted to first talk about his resource management further. To start this section off though, we need to talk about his resource gauge and how much energy he gains from his allies. This is important since monitoring and tracking how much morale he has will affect just how long you need to wait before you should swap him onto field. In his core passive description, it reads that he gains 0.26 morale for every point of energy consumed by squad members. And in that case, we have the following results. Lighter will gain 20.8 morale from any skill or combination of skills that cost 80 energy. He gains 15.6 morale from skills that cost 60 energy to cast. And finally, he gains 10.6 from any skills that cost 40 to cast. You get the idea. But with these numbers, I made a calculation of this plus his passive morale generation to come up with the following conclusion. On average, it will take roughly 4 or 5 allied EX specials for Lighter to gain enough morale for his burst state. And this is also accounting for how long performing certain skills will take, as Lighter will also gain energy while these skills are being cast. This means that Lighter will usually gain enough morale to enter burst, assuming that both of his allied squadmates can use their EX specials twice. But since dodging and moving around the field can sometimes add extra seconds into the equation, it's not always possible to calculate his morale gain properly. This was a lot of chatting and math honestly for just a resource bar though, so I'll simplify and explain why this is important in the next section. On that note, let's talk about Lighter's combos. This section is actually pretty simple since he's just a stunner, but the setup to his combos can sometimes need context. This is the most obvious when Lighter attempts to fight multiple waves of enemies, and so let's address his AoE non-boss combo first. Normally, stunners have the goal of saving their energy against multiple enemies so that they can use it later against bosses, but given Lighter's unimpressive daze multipliers on his basic attacks and the lack of morale he has at the start of a fight, using a cast of his EX special to quickly group and activate a chain attack is actually much more necessary than you think. Alternatively, foregoing this loss and simply performing a dodge counter and following it with his basic attacks until the enemies are dazed is another option, but it does of course require waiting on the enemy to strike first and of course biting the loss in potential daze. Now against single target enemies or when fighting against bosses, we have a different combo. The main difference between this and the other combo is access to the morale burst state and the additional buff/debuff he will provide to the team. To be clear, Lighter is best played when he is only swapped on field when he has at least 80 morale, and until then, using someone like your support or the main attack agent on field is going to be your best play. After 80 morale has been achieved, however, performing a defensive assist with an allied agent to then swap Lighter onto field is how we'll begin the combo. Following the defensive assist, performing a follow-up assist that allows Lighter to skip to his 5th basic attack will be key, and as he slowly drains his morale gauge with the jab combo from his basic attacks, using EX specials to then replenish his resource is critical. Finally, after using his EX specials, remember to return back to his jab combo after performing his 4th basic attack, and then you can rinse and repeat. This does sound pretty simple since it's just use resource to replenish other resource and then swap out to another agent when he no longer has energy. However, if you run out of energy but are close to stunning the boss, it's also fine to just stay on field until Lighter regains his morale or until he can stun the boss using his dodge counters or his basic attacks. Now, even after more research and testing with Lighter's build choices, his best options are still honestly the same. Lighter has 3 potential 4-piece set options, with Shockstar being the best 2-piece choice. The first 4-piece he can use is Protopunk, but again, I totally understand why this sounds a bit wasteful or weird. However, despite Lighter not having any shields, the amount of defensive assists that he performs in his team compositions provides him with a decently high uptime on the 4-piece set effect that comes from Protopunk. Freedom Blues, as always, is an amazing option if Lighter is paired with other fire element agents, but as usual, this set has its own set of pros and cons. This includes losing value when Lighter is paired with Ellen, or gaining value when being paired with Bernice or Soldier. Overall, this is a solid choice, especially since many of the strongest characters in the game prefer anomaly disc drive sets like Freedom Blues, and so if you're farming for it anyways, you might as well use it for Lighter too. Swing Jazz is another viable option for Lighter if Protopunk is unavailable for whatever reason, but do note that, as I mentioned earlier, Swing Jazz has a much worse feeling since, of course, you have to use chain attacks as opposed to Protopunk, which only needs to perform defensive assists. The final set I know a lot of players will gravitate towards is Shockstar Disco, but I have to mention this once again. This set is not nearly as valuable as it might sound on a character like Lighter. Because he spends so much time off field, the 4-piece set effect from Shockstar Disco can become much harder to use, and unlike other agents who use their basics and dash attacks more frequently, Lighter often uses defensive assists and EX special attacks to generate the most days. Therefore, using this as his 4-piece set effect should really not be the call and should actually be avoided when possible. Now, for his 2-piece set, Shockstar Disco will still be his best choice, assuming you aren't running it as his 4-piece, but if you are for some reason running 4-piece Shockstar, any combination of Swing Jazz, Freedom Blues, or even Chaos Jazz as his 2-piece option will still be fine too. My recommendations for a set on Lighter has actually still stayed the same, and therefore 4-piece Freedom Blues if running Lighter with another fire agent is ideal, but otherwise I would just use 4-piece Protopunk for the amount of assisting that he does on field. Stat-wise, Lighter can of course alternate between his Anomaly and Crit builds, so let's take a look at each. Anomaly build-wise, a 4th slot Anomaly proficiency disc, a 5th slot fire damage or attack percent disc, and impact on the 6th slot disc is key. And for crit, the only difference here is a crit rate or crit damage in the 4th slot instead of Anomaly. Substat-wise, for the Anomaly build, attack percent and Anomaly proficiency are the only 2 stats to really focus on, but pen and flat attack are fine too. And now finally for crit Lighter, the golden 1:2 crit rate to crit damage ratio should still remain while trying to find as many attack percent or overall rolls as possible. As a disclaimer, Anomaly Lighter still has a slight advantage over crit Lighter because any amount of Anomaly that Lighter builds will reduce how much he dilutes the overall Anomaly damage dealt by allies. However, they both deal pretty mediocre damage overall. Again, the only difference in value here from one build to another is preventing yourself from lowering another agent's damage, and while that by itself is still pretty valuable, so it's worth mentioning. Now, unlike his substats, Lighter's W engine choice is actually pretty impactful, no pun intended. Let's start with his signature first. This is his best performing and feeling choice, and it provides a crazy amount of damage for his team while also providing the best overall days on a W engine. And let's be honest, the ice damage and fire damage by themselves already make this the best option, especially for agents who don't already have a lot of damage bonuses in their kit, but regardless if they do, changing around builds to accommodate for the new stats will only see this W engine's performance rise even higher. In my previous video on Lighter, I also mentioned that Blazing Laurel paired with someone like Ellen who's running Brimstone can be powerful, and lo and behold, even now this hasn't changed and is still relevant. If Blazing Laurel isn't available, however, Ice Shade Teapot also works too. Ultimately, the performance of Blazing Laurel and Ice Shade Teapot are just so much higher than the other W engines here, simply because of the damage increases that they provide to the team. But never fear, let's actually move on now and talk about these free-to-play choices. Fossilized Core is by far the best choice here for several reasons. The impact on base stats, the added days increase from its passive. There's a lot to appreciate with this W engine, and that's not even accounting for it being easier to obtain than the other options on this list. Now, although this isn't necessarily free to play, if you unfortunately lost a 50-50 and have an S-rank stun W engine, I also evaluated and tested these options too. Hellfire Gears outperformed the Restrained in situations where it could stack more than once, but truthfully, both of these options performed at around the same level on average. Now, let's talk about whether pulling for a signature is worthwhile. I still find myself with the same belief as before, and that's the following. This W engine is very nice for dazing faster. It does also increase element damage for ice and fire, and its passive is pretty easy to activate. With these factors alone, you could definitely argue that this W engine will be valuable now and in the future on non-lighter agents, but personally, if I was someone that already had Jade Teapot, this W engine would probably be a skip for me unless you really wanted to maximize your damage on two specific elements. As always though, if you're someone who loves crit-based fire or ice units, go ahead and pick this up. The final topic I wanted to bring up as we close the W engine section is impact. If you missed it in the prior section, Lighter can increase the Elation Stack's buff value when his additional ability is active, but this depends on how much impact he has. Now, after doing calculations and testing, Lighter will need 270 impact to gain the max value from his skills. This then begs the question, what W engines can get him to this 270 threshold? Well, there are three. The first is his signature, Blazing Laurel, the second is Ice Jade Teapot, and the third is Hellfire Gears, assuming you can maintain 2 stacks of its passive. Now, this damage bonus might not actually be nearly as insane as it sounds, especially if you're pairing this with agents who have a lot of percentage damage in their kit already, but assuming you're able to activate this threshold somehow, it's actually a fantastic investment. Special note here regarding the impact calculations, by the way, but this is of course assuming that these are S-rank W engines and are at rank 1 without multiple copies. Lighter's Mindscapes are all over the place, with other creators and testing showing inconsistencies, and this is best seen through his first and second Mindscapes, which involve their wording. For the first Mindscape, the description reads, among the debuffs imposed by core passive Accelerant, the collapse effect increases stun duration by 5 seconds. Now, prior to this video, testing on this showed that the Mindscape increased the total duration of the stun to 5 seconds, not by 5 seconds. This unfortunately is a massive difference depending on what the intended effect is, but things got even more complicated with his second Mindscape, which reads that the increase to ice and fire damage provided by Elation from additional ability Fighting Spirit increases by 120% of the original. Despite this maybe ambiguous wording, this doesn't give Lighter a 120% fire and ice damage bonus, but rather it changes from 75% to 90%. All of this makes evaluating his Mindscapes kind of difficult, but that's not all. As per my writing of this guide, the first Mindscape was changed again to actually fit the description that they provided, so now instead of it being a 5-second increase total, it's 8 seconds. This is a lot of changing and uncertainty, so for now what can be said is that both the first and second Mindscape are decent increases to damage, but they're not that insane. Moving beyond this, his fourth Mindscape is also nice for providing energy to the team, but this is honestly not nearly as flashy as his sixth Mindscape. The sixth Mindscape now provides him with an amazing amount of damage and does honestly almost tempt me into building him into a DPS, but as always, this is a sixth Mindscape that focuses on damage for a stunner, so do with that what you will. Now let's talk about the teams. There are a few different teams now that I tested after my first impressions with Lighter, and these are Ellen Lighter Sukaku, Bernice Yanagi Lighter, Soldier 11 Lighter Caesar, and Crit Bernice Lighter Caesar. Ellen Lighter Sukaku still kind of feels bad since Caesar isn't compatible with the team, but because it was mentioned and asked about in my comment sections, I decided to test Lighter and Lycone together as a variation. Between my old findings and new, I did notice that having a quicker stun time via double Dazer was helpful, but ultimately my clear times were still faster when I had Ellen Sukaku Lighter. Of course, this team does still perform amazingly, regardless if Caesar is or isn't on the team, or if you end up using Lycone or Sukaku, but do know that this is one of the better teams that synergizes with Lighter, since Ellen can be played on field a majority of the time as a main field greedy DPS. Moving along, let's talk about Bernice Yanagi Lighter. Truthfully, I wanted to skip this section because it's really hard to find any weaknesses with a team that involves Anomaly and stuns, but in case you were wondering, Yanagi and Bernice do live up to the hype. This team is honestly more of a stun with Lighter quickly and then do whatever you want kind of composition, but it does lack the safety of someone like Caesar or even the attack increases and potential buildup from someone like Lucy. However, these features aren't really that necessary, especially when Bernice and Yanagi one-shot most of the elites and eliminate most bosses in under a minute anyways, but overall, my main complaint about this team is that it honestly doesn't showcase the strength of Lighter at all, as opposed to simply highlighting Anomaly. Soldier 11 Lighter Caesar and Crit Bernice Lighter Caesar were the next two teams I wanted to compare and share my findings on, and what I found is honestly kind of shocking. When building Bernice with Crit, I actually found way more success clearing the same Shiyu defense floors as Soldier, and this was primarily because of the critting afterburn effect and how easy it was to maintain fire anomalies. Soldier 11 in this team composition still performed well when timing basic attacks perfectly, but Bernice simply cleared enemies the moment I swapped to another agent and began proccing her passive. This is again probably helped more because of how much damage and stunning characters like Caesar and Lighter deal together, but at the end of the day, both these team compositions were more than capable of clearing content anyways. Now the last thing we need to talk about is whether Lighter is worth pulling for. This still gives me trouble when I think about it, and it's even harder because of how cool he looked in his trailer. Flashy design aside though, Lighter as of 1.3 doesn't really change things up too much, especially because of how similar he is in performance to characters like Lycone or Kaleda. Despite him even outperforming these other characters in many cases, his additional ability limits his ice potential in a way that really hasn't been seen in ZenlessZoneZero thus far. And this doesn't even account for the fact that the fire DPS options he has to synergize with really just aren't that amazing. In general though, I think it's safe to assume that ZenlessZoneZero will eventually release characters that make Lighter even more powerful. However, until that day, I could definitely see players skipping or saving for the next agent after him. As always though, I will be pulling for him since he looks pretty fun to play, and I love the jab spamming and athletics of his design. But as always guys, feel free to do whatever you'd like. That's gonna be it for this video though guys. Thanks again for watching. Thanks again for supporting today's content. If you enjoyed today's video, make sure to check out the rest of my socials for the rest of my content. And if you would be so kind, make sure to like, comment, turn on the notification bell, and subscribe. I'll see you all in the next one. Stay safe, stay healthy. Good night.